Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 10. 10. We made it. I'm so excited. Episode 10 of Sipping Tea with Stacey T. I am Stacey T, if you've not met me yet. I'm really excited to have this particular episode because, again, it's a jumping off point. I've made it to 10 episodes. I'm so honored that you have been with me for the past episodes that I've done, whether you've been joining them live or if you've been looking at them later. Know that I wholeheartedly appreciate you. And so I'm really excited on this one in particular because we're going to talk about a subject that I don't think is discussed in the way that I might be discussing it. Addiction is a really important topic, and all of us face it in one way or another. All of us are connected to it in one way or another. So we will be discussing that and breaking that down a little bit during today's Sipping Tea with me. As you know, or for those of you who are new, every single episode I do try a tea. Whether it's a tea that I've had before, maybe it's a different brand that I've maybe not tried before. And so that is the case today. Today I am fortunate enough to have chai tea. This was chosen for me today at random. And this is from the Char Brew Company. Now, I did try them last time. Chai tea is one of my favorite teas, actually. So I'm excited to see what their interpretation of this chai tea is. It is a black tea in general, like this company. That's what they're kind of most known for. I kind of did a little bit of research. So I'm so glad that you're on. Hello. I see you guys coming in. So again, we're going to try this particular chai tea out. I'm going to add my hot water, let it steep for a little bit, and see what is going on. And again, really interesting, just like with the last tea that I had from this particular company, the color of the tea comes out immediately when hit with the hot water. So I'm really excited about that. For those of you who do not know, I'm really excited about next week's episode as well. I'm not getting ahead of myself, but it's going to be a really powerful episode 11, which is going to be talking about autism. We're going to really see inside what autism looks like, feels like from an expert, somebody that is actually on the live right now. So you'll be able to ask questions of her. I'll talk a little bit about my knowledge, because the funny thing is, when we start putting specific terms to things, I don't want to say labels because it's not a label, but when we start identifying things, I think sometimes people forget that even if you say, a child has been diagnosed with autism, you can't put them in a box, right? It's not one size fits all. So we're going to talk about all the things that are involved. So hello to so many of you that are coming in right now. I see I have Tiffany here, I have Cheryl here, I have Kathy, I have Kim. Thank you all for joining in today. For those of you who just came in, I'm steeping a chai tea, which is typically one of my favorite. I actually use like spiced chai tea, though chai in itself has spice. So we will see how that goes over momentarily. So again, hopefully you'll enjoy this episode, but please, 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 I want you to be here next week as well, because it's going to be really powerful. The time will be shared in the next, I was waiting for feedback from one person. And so I'm waiting for that. And then today, before the end of today, I will have the announcement of the time so you guys can prepare appropriately to be here. All right. With that, again, thank you for being here for episode 10. Today, we're going to talk about addiction. And I think when people automatically think of addiction, and I said this when I advertised for this particular episode, people automatically go to like the big things, right? They go to drugs, or they go to alcohol, or they go to gambling even, maybe food addiction, right? There's lots of different types of addiction. Unfortunately, we kind of go to those ones first. That's kind of where our mind goes, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's maybe what we've been exposed to. But I want to say that each and every one of you, and you may not be thinking about it, but you have some type of addiction. And the addiction can be many things. So before I get started, I want you, when you think of addiction, I want you to write down in the chat, what are the things that you think most often about? And you don't have to say, if you have addictions, you don't have to say, I'm talking about myself, but I'm really curious as to what you think when you kind of think about this topic. And while you're doing that, I'm going to stir my tea a little bit, and let's see what this tastes like. I'm actually pushing on this one is darker than the last one. And I think you guys remember me, well, you might remember me last week talking about the tea. I think I had afternoon tea from Char Brew, and that tea was really dark as well. Don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but this one got really dark kind of quickly. So curious as to what this tastes like. So for those of you who are coming in, again, I want you to write in the chat, when you think of addiction, what is the first thing, or what are the first few things that you think about beyond, and if you think of drugs and alcohol, that's fine to add that, but what other things are you thinking about when you're thinking about the term addiction? Hey Al, nice to see you. All right. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's, honestly, at this point, I'm like, I don't know if this is my taste buds, but this doesn't really taste like chai tea. I mean, I taste a hint, like the faintest hint of like the spice that kind of differentiates chai tea from your regular tea. But there's nothing that's like, you know, blowing my socks off. That's like a differentiator between the two. So I'm going to let it sit for a while. And it's like really, really dark, my tea right now. But I'm going to let it sit there. So I'm waiting to see. I don't know if any of you have posted in the chat yet, but what I will say is, and I always, for those of you, what brand is it? It's Char Brew tea. Now, when I drink my my typical chai, it's Bigelow, and so I really like their chai tea. All right, so people, addictions, completing a task, a project close to perfect as possible. That's absolutely. Food addiction, nicotine addiction, absolutely. Those are really, really common. Really, really common. And what I'm going to be talking about, and as people are continuing to write their, you know, the addictions that are coming to their mind, I think that one thing that's really important to remember is that addiction happens for a reason. Right? I don't feel, and again, I'm not a scientist, so don't come for me and say, well, Stacey, the scientific. I'm just talking from Stacey's perspective. Church addiction, that's really interesting. Something I rely on to relax my mind is watching cleaning videos, cleaning houses or cars. Shopping addiction, yes. A lot of people have that one. An addiction, a fix, something to get you to that point. Yeah. You know, I think that it's really interesting because, you know, when I think about addiction in general, I always think about the why. Like, so when I think about, you know, how people act the way they do, or why people act the way they do, why people do the things or involved in the things that they do, oftentimes it's to fill something, right? There's something missing or something that makes them feel a way. And addiction for me is, okay, as I'm processing this thing that's happening, why is it happening? Let's see if I'm just trying to make sure I got everybody's responses. Don't want to skip anyone. But I think, you know, you guys mentioned a lot of really great ones. Shopping addiction, church addiction. Success is a huge addiction for people, right? That idea of I have to reach whatever it is that success is. You know, the idea of being perfect or coming across perfect. Some people might have addictions to their presentation. You know, what do I look like at all times? One of the things that I talked about when I kind of wrote the write-up of this particular episode was that for a lot of people, image addiction is not something that's discussed, but it's often something that is developed even from when we were a little kid. So let's go back there. For those of you who have been around for this, you know that that's what I do. I go back to, you know, the younger Stacey, and I bring you all the way up to the one that is you're currently sitting before you. So, you know, when I was a little kid, I think that there was definitely this, and I can't say that somebody put this on me. So I'm not quite sure where this came from, but there was definitely a feeling that I had that I needed to be perfect. And I'm not saying that, like, again, I'm not quite sure where it came from. I do know that, you know, I always felt like I needed to be successful, whatever that looked like, and we'll talk momentarily about that. But I felt like I had to have, you know, the right grades. I had to look a specific way. Now, I will say a lot of the you know, you have to look a specific way, that mentality did come from, you know, how communities are, how culturally things are. You know, a lot of people will say, you know, people are like, don't go out looking crazy because that's a reflection on me. And I've heard many parents, I'm not a parent, but I've heard many, many parents say that. Don't go out of this house looking crazy. Make sure that, because I don't want people coming to me saying that I can't take care of my kids. So I remember, you know, back in the day, having everything, you know, especially when you go to church, right? Everything was just so. My outfit matched, and I, by the way, do not really wear pink. If you've met me or you know me well, I do not wear pink, and I think it's because I had pink explosion when I was a child. So it'd be like the pink dress with the pink bobby socks and the pink bow and the pink bow in the hair, and your hair was slicked back to, I mean, you had to sit, right? You sat by that stove and you got your hair straightened to death, or you had those foam curlers that used to bend your bang the wrong way. But you literally had to look a specific way. Your shoes were shined. There weren't any scuff marks. All of those things were so important, and it was embedded in us. That's how you conduct yourself, right? And I'm not saying looking presentable is a bad thing. I think anything taken to a level where you are doing too much of a thing, Tiffany, you remember these things, right? Too much of a thing can make you feel uneasy. And if you look back on the mentality of, you know, why you looked the way you did, what was that? Was that about you looking presentable, or was it about somebody else having something to say about someone else's kid? So I think that that's one of the things, and unfortunately, lessons, sometimes good or bad, can be manipulated in our brain, right? I heard my mom said that, and now I find myself saying it too, but I realize they are themselves. Yeah, and I mean, look, I have no problem with a parent saying, don't go out of the house looking crazy. I think that that's good, right? And I remember being a teacher and saying it to some of my students, don't come into this class looking crazy. And sometimes they would come in and try me. You know, they would come in. I remember I had a student that would come in and wear like this tight stuff, or like, you know, all the stuff hanging out in the chest area. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. So I remember I brought in this ugly flannel shirt. And if people knew when I brought out the flannel shirt that they were going to have to cover themselves up, they started dressing a little bit better, because nobody wanted to wear that thing. They're like, that doesn't look right, or it's hot out. I'm like, well, you chose to wear this in my classroom, and you already knew what the situation was. So I think that there's not anything wrong with that to a degree. I think we have to sometimes unpack why we do the things that we do. And often we heard, do it because I said so, right? And that's why you did things. Okay, I get that. But now we're adults and we're looking at why were some of these things said. Some good, some we can keep, some that we add to, some that we throw out. But we should now be not just saying we do things because it was what our parents did, or their parents did, or what we saw at church, or what we saw in the community. We need to look at the why. And as I said at the beginning, that's always been important to me. Why is it that we do the things that we do? So for me, I remember, you know, and I've mentioned this multiple times, I grew up in an area where people didn't look like me. And I don't really know exactly when this happened, but I do remember starting to be very conscious of my size. And I was a lot smaller. I'm plus size, but I was a lot smaller even then. So it's funny that, you know, looking back, I'm like, man, I would kill to be that size again. But the reality of it is I had a very specific way that I was viewing myself. And I remember that I looked around and the people that were around me looked a lot different. And it wasn't just because they were white, it was because they were all small. And I remember thinking to myself, why can I be like that? And it's not even like back in the day, my family did a whole bunch of junk food. My mom cooked all the time. We were active, all the things, but I still looked different than those kids. And I remember I think it was maybe around middle school, high school, when I was really super conscious of it. But in high school, when I started to get into, and mind you, in high school, I did track, I was in plays. So it was, again, it wasn't like I was just sitting around and doing nothing, but I still looked physically different than the majority of my classmates. And I remember like getting obsessed with trying to look like them, regardless of whether the ways made any sense, like taking diet pills or not eating my lunch when my mom would give us a whole lunch and I'd be like, I'm just going to eat the grapes and the Triscuits, and I give my lunch away. I'm sure my mom loves to hear that now. But that was the reality, because I had a specific way that I felt like I should look. So I was addicted to making that my goal. Now, in a healthy way, right? For those of you who work out or go to the gym or all those things, that's good. Not eating to achieve that is not healthy, right? So, but I was addicted to that. And what happened was, I remember the one time somebody said, wow, Stacey, you look great. That was the worst thing that person could have ever said to me. Because at that point, as soon as they said that, now the addiction was like full throttle. It was entirely out of control. I was going to do anything. Okay, I'm not going to eat. I'm going to eat like literally. And when I say grapes, it wasn't like I had a bag of grapes. I had like this much grapes for the entire day. And maybe I don't remember what it was of Triscuits, right? Maybe like 8, 9, maybe 10 Triscuits for the day. And I was either, running track or doing the shot put, because I did shot put, or I was in the musical working, doing dance routines and doing all that. And that's all that I was eating all day. So what I want you to kind of take away from that is, when you have an addiction, there's a mental component to it, right? There's a reasoning why. There's something that is pushing you to make decisions that you otherwise would not make for yourself, and that are typically unhealthy for yourself. So one person mentioned shopping addiction. And I know a lot of people that have that addiction. I am not one. Let me just tell you, I've never enjoyed shopping. When people are like, oh, let's go to the mall, I'm like, that's like a torture device for me. That's never been like an enjoyable suggestion. No, thank you. If I have to go to the store, it's like, okay, I'm going with a mission, in and out and get out of there. I do not want to hang out. Don't want to window shop. Don't want to peruse. Like, no, thank you. Even like, and I love makeup, but even that, I'm like, okay, like that I might spend like a half an hour. But other than that, like people that go to the mall for hours and hours, no, thank you. But the reality is it's beyond that, because now we can shop from home, right? And so people with shopping addiction are just buying and buying and buying and buying things that they don't necessarily need, or things that they don't even know that they still have, or they already have, because they're just purchasing stuff, right? So then you just have you have the UPS people, the Amazon drivers that know who you are on a first name basis. Let me tell you, folks, it ain't good. Why are you, but again, let's unpack the why. The why is because there's something that is trying to be filled somewhere else. Addiction literally is filling something with something else, or controlling something where you do not feel in control. So oftentimes people, and there's reasons. So I'm not like negating why people do the things they do. And that's something that a psychologist or a psychiatrist would have to unpack. I am neither of those things, right? But what I will say is, there's a reason. There's something that people either feel was taken from them, they feel out of control, and that they do not have the ability to make decisions, and people are making them for them. And so a lot of times that's the why that people will be making those things. So going back to, teenage Stacey, I remember, continuing to do all these things and just moving through life like everything was fine. But it started to affect me. There were times where like my heart would flutter because I'm taking diet pills, I'm working out, and I'm not eating, right? So your body is like, whoa, what's going on? And there was a point where I was like, okay, Stacey, you can continue to do this, and you could literally and truly hurt yourself in the process. So like, let's think about the why. Let's think about why you're doing this. And if people are honest, and I have to say, and I can't speak to your situation, but I can speak to mine. In being honest, I felt like I wasn't good enough as I was, right? I wasn't complete enough. I wasn't attractive enough. I didn't fit in enough. And the reality of it is sometimes you're meant not to fit in, and that has to be okay for the escape of it all. Yeah. I think that sometimes we have to be okay not fitting in. Like, there's this weird thing that happens, right? I think that what happens in most situations is when people are put into an environment, whether it be in school or at work or in church, and I'm speaking about ones that I'm most familiar with, but you can plant yourself in any of those situations, right? Any other situations. Maybe it's an organization that you're a part of, or even in a relationship. We observe the people we're around, and our goal is not to feel uncomfortable in that situation. But what does that mean? Often that means then we morph into, or we start adopting behaviors of the other person, or we start feeling really uncomfortable because, maybe everybody loves, Kim, right? They love Kim and they love being around her, or they love Al and they like being around him. They love his energy. And you feel like, you're like, well, I can be like Kim, or I can be like Al, right? And so you want to fit in. I think that everybody, it's funny because for the most part, I do hang by myself and I love my company. Right? But I think that everybody wants to have someone, not necessarily a huge group, because let me tell you, I do not want, need, or desire a huge group. But I think that there's a desire to feel connected. And so for that reason, we have these relationships, we have these friendships, we have, work people that we hang out with at work. There are some people at work that you're like, okay, I just work with that person. We will never go out to dinner. We're never going to go to see a play. We're not going to go to a ball game. Like, you are my work person and that's it. Like, I don't even need to call you a work friend. I just know you from work. I'll say, hey, at work, and that's it. But there's some people that you work with that you do like, their company. You end up going out to dinner or maybe lunch with them. And that is a really normal progression. But what I will say is, when you're kind of, assessing the person that you're around, are you now different because you're trying to be different to kind of fit in or assimilate? And I get it. But you have to be really careful of not being having a need to be so connected to people that you forget who you are. So it's almost like being addicted to companionship, being addicted to a relationship, being addicted to a friendship. All those things can be wonderful. All those things can be and should be lovely. Are you okay being alone? And I don't mean alone as in like being lonely and always being alone and never hanging around or speaking to other people. But and this is the thing. People are like, oh, I like being alone, Stacey. I'm like, okay, I'm not talking about like hanging out by yourself, and you should like that, right? You should be okay hanging out by yourself, having, dinner or lunch, or going to dinner or lunch, or reading a book and having some alone time. But believe it or not, there are some people that can't be alone at all. They cannot be alone at all. They need to have somebody up under them all the time. And I say it like that because the idea of that is like, oh my gosh, no thank you. No ma'am, no ham, not interested. Like, leave me be for a little bit. But there are some people that need that. What is the why? What is the why? Why are you addicted to having someone around you? And I think often, if people are honest, it's because if you have somebody around you all the time, you can't stop and think about your stuff, right? I think people try to avoid their reality, and I think Cheryl mentioned it earlier, for an escape. A lot of people do a lot of things in life for an escape. So addiction in its, purest form, I think that's really what it is. if I can gamble, then I'm avoiding my reality. Maybe I'll hit it big and I can live better, or, travel or do whatever. I'm addicted to, taking on more work at work so people think that I'm this person and I can have more notoriety and people know my name, right? And I will tell you, there's a real, you have to be really, really careful about what happens when you kind of make the decision that you're going to allow for some of these things to like grow. Because when I tell you, being addicted to success, whatever that looks like to you, can be really, really dangerous. Just like being addicted to a drug or being addicted to gambling. If you gamble and gamble and gamble and you have no more money, I mean, maybe some of you know a person that has been like that they gamble and gamble and gamble to the point where they're stealing. And that was never in their nature, right? Because now they've let one thing take over how they think. They've let one thing take over the decision making that they normally would be very level-headed in making, right? And now they're this other person. Because in order to gamble, if you now have no money, you have to feed that addiction, right? Because the addiction is now controlling you. Addiction is also interesting because it does change the chemical, like the synapses, the messages that are sent out in your brain. It literally changes that, which is to me, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that the decisions that I make that now make me out of control, they literally take over my decision. It's like it feeds this like weird part in your brain that now you have zero control over. I mentioned, and I can't remember which episode that I mentioned this in, but for me, one of the things that I remember, people would say, Stacey, if you allow somebody to get you angry, then they're controlling you, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I do not want people controlling me. Imagine you have allowed for this thing, right? Not even a person, because now it's overridden you. I don't know if any of you have seen Spider-Man. And it's the one with Doc Ock in it. I can't remember which one it is. But he literally had a chip in the back of his brain. And this machine took over how he thought. It took over his ability to make decisions that were rational. And this was a brilliant man, a brilliant scientist that just allowed for his need to be able to, have this invention and have this thing that would change the world and revolutionize the world. Our decision making doesn't necessarily go that far, but imagine the decisions that we're allowing to take over our brain are now changing family life. It's changing relationships. It's changing our relationship with God. But most importantly, well, our relationship with God is the most important, but it's also changing our relationship with ourselves. It's really it's so funny. I've had conversations, and I mean funny, not haha, but funny, odd. It's so odd that I've had conversations with people that don't even realize that they're no longer themselves. They have allowed for something, and oftentimes one of the biggest addictions that I find, so I was hoping that one of you mentioned it, not that it's the most important one to everyone, but I feel like the most important addiction for me was love. I was like fiending for it in any way, shape, or form that I could get it. I was going to try to get it. So that meant dating some losers, right? It meant, and I told you guys I was going to write a book called Dating the Same Loser with a Different Face. I was seeking after that. And people talk about that often in their lives, is that, a lot of the decisions that they make, whether it's dating someone or not dating, getting married, getting engaged, all the things that people do, especially in relationships, what is their why? And people say, oh, because, that's normal. You find somebody that you're interested in and you date, and that may be the case. But also, if we're looking at ourselves, because my hope is that when you're in the space of coming to my episodes, is that you're willing to do some self-inspection, some introspection, looking at yourself and, the reason why you might do some of the things that you do. And, if you're a person who is addicted to that, finding that love, the reality is you might allow yourself to be love bombed. You might allow yourself to, you know about that love addiction. You might allow yourself to make some really bad and poor choices that when you look back on it, because let me just tell you this. I don't know about any of y'all, but I definitely have looked back on some of the people I've dated and I was like, what was I going through? Because clearly I was going through it to be dating this person. The person that maybe mistreated me, spoke about me negatively. You know, my sister did. Let me tell you, if my sister don't like you, then it's rough. That's all I can tell you, because she has a really good discerning spirit. So if she don't like you, then it's going to be a rough situation for you. But the reality of it is, you know, we in our head are like, oh, well, maybe this person is a different person than I thought. And, you know, let me give them, and I talked about this before, chance after chance after chance. And it's wonderful to give people chances to know God. It's fine for people to get chances to know you, but it doesn't mean that you need to be with them, right? Because if you are now changing the person that you are just because of this other person, then what happened to you? What happened to you? Where are you in this situation? Because now, not only has this person, you know, presented themselves to be something different, now you've lost yourself in the whole process. So you have to go find yourself, right? I see that you guys have a love addiction. I need my space. Me too. I see your post. It will make you entertain people you had no business entertaining. Man, that is not the truth. That is 100% the truth. You know, it's so interesting that I think what's really interesting is that people don't necessarily see the full picture. And that's I think the mechanism. Remember I was talking about in your brain, how it changes the synapses and the messaging. I truly believe that when you're in addiction, because of this misfiring, you don't see half the mess you would see. When you step back, you're like, oh my gosh, Stacey, what in the world were you doing? What in the world were you thinking? And unfortunately, when we're in it, you just can't see it. But I definitely have been in relationships that, you know, I've unpacked now, and wow, the amount of stuff that I allowed, the amount of times that I allowed my spirit to be broken is unreal. So why? That's when you really have to start thinking about the why. Why did I allow for that? Why is the ideal of love? And I think that's the other issue. It's really, for me, well, not now, but even still, it's one of those things you have to constantly stay on top of. But the ideal of love, because quite frankly, I think oftentimes we don't even know what that is, right? When I ask people all the time, so tell me, what do you think success is? People will say to me, oh, you know, it's having a car, or, you know, my favorite is when I'm like, okay, so tell me what successful is. And they're like, being successful. Like, you can't answer a question with the same word. So then they'll say, oh, you know, having a nice house, or having a car, or, you know, being married and having the 2.2 kids and the dog. Those are the measures that people will use. But quite frankly, is that really successful to them? I don't know. I don't know if they really were willing to do the work and really think about that, is that what would make them happy? You know, as I talked about, for me, my biggest addiction was love. So that meant I believed in, you know, all the happily ever after stories, and, you know, being rescued and all that stuff, which sounds great. But what that also does is it can put a very heavy weight on any single person that you meet. And I'm not just talking about love, like romantic love, but even friendship. Like, if you believe in, you know, this kind of fairy tale version of any relationships or conversations or any of these things, it can make the real thing feel so flat, feel so blah. So you're expecting, you know, this person to be ridiculously wealthy, have a six-pack, be a certain height, have, a certain car, maybe already be employed, blah, 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 blah. Like whatever your thing is. And the reality of it is the package that love for you might come in may meet none of your metrics, right? Because God is like, okay, that's great. That's cute that you have dreams and goals. And it's not to say that he won't meet those for you. But if he has a plan for you, that doesn't involve your addiction, right? Your addiction to a specific thing is not what, like, he doesn't make decisions based on your addiction, right? So your desire to, look a specific way or have a specific thing that you call success, he may bring you in an entirely different direction, right? You're like, okay, I want to make this amount of money and I want to live in this kind of house. And he's like, okay, that's good. And it's not to say he doesn't give those things to you, but that does not move his heart, right? He might say, okay, I get where you're coming from, and I get that that's what people find to be successful, but you telling people about, being happy, and you helping people realize their best selves, and you making people feel seen, and you maybe, blessing people that don't have. Those are things that, are, if you really look at it, are measures of success, are measures of goodness. But again, does that feed your addiction? That's the thing. So when people are thinking of addiction, right? Again, I talked about oftentimes at the beginning, people think about drugs. What is the main thing that, if you've ever worked with or known somebody that has been addicted to drugs of any kind, whether it be, nicotine or, illegal drugs or, prescription drugs or even alcohol, what is the thing that they find out after taking drugs the first time? So I'm curious what your response is, and I'm going to try my tea again. I'm giving it another chance. Let's see if this is any better than the first time. So what is the thing that people learn? They do their drug of choice, whatever it may be, and then they do it again. What is it that they learn? Okay, I put a tiny bit of sweetener. It still doesn't give me that chai taste. It tastes very much like a black tea. I'm not even, it won't relieve their pain. That's absolutely correct. It doesn't relieve their pain. So if oftentimes, and a lot of addiction, by the way, does stem from that, right? It is, and I'm going to talk about that momentarily, about pain leading towards that. It's short-lived and they need another fix. That is so true. It doesn't change anything. All of these things are 100% the truth. It does not change a thing. Because you go get high and you're like, okay, maybe your mind is altered for that moment. Maybe you pass out because you did too much, and then you wake up, that it feels good. Yeah, they make that first time, right? After that first time, they're like, wow, this is great. I don't have to think about whatever my pain was. But the next day or later in that same day, they wake up and their situation hasn't changed, right? Their situation has not changed. And depending on what the addictive thing that you're using, whether it's gambling or, affection or whatever it is, it costs, right? It costs. So it might cost your dignity. It may cost a lot of money. I've seen people to the point where it costs them having a home, a roof over their head. It costs them having family connections, because sometimes their family can't mess with them anymore. They're like, okay, you're choosing this over the family, and I can't do it. So the cost of addiction, is that something that you thought about? Can you pay that? And for those of you who have lost people to addiction, it was one of those things that, and I mean like literally lost them, they've passed away, or that they've lost themselves, they're unrecognizable. It's painful watching that happen. It is so, so painful watching someone kind of disappear. The person that you knew, like even the light behind their eyes just kind of disappearing, right? the reality of it is they have chosen, and we all make choices. God gives us free will. So we all make our own choices. We all live with the circumstances of our choices. We all live with the outcome of our choices. But the reality is, our choices do not just happen and then they disappear and then we go about our lives. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So that means something happens because of the choices that we make. Trying to erase the past hurt that they did to someone, like a child they hurt. Man, there's so much addiction, I feel, for so many people is wrapped in a form of pain. And that pain can be feeling like you didn't have control over your life, especially as a kid. It can feel like, you feel like a failure. It can feel like a whole host of things that have happened negatively and you're trying to numb the pain. A lot of addiction functions that way. A lot of addiction grows that way. I feel like pain can give addiction legs to continue to keep walking, continue to keep running. But if we're honest as well, and that's what I'm hoping, that as we're looking at ourselves, addiction can also give people an excuse, right? There's this interesting thing that people are also addicted to, because I talked about love being one of the addictions that I had to really kind of navigate through. But one of the addictions that people have is trauma addiction. There are some people in our lives that cannot exist without trauma and maybe even drama. But I'm not talking about that. But there are some people in our lives that's all they talk about. They talk about, the negative things that have happened to them, the negative people that have been in their lives, things that have not gone right or the way that they planned. Let me just tell you, every single person experiences trauma. If I guaranteed to ask all of you right now, if you had any trauma, every single person would have their own set of trauma. And I'm not negating it, by the way, because I've had trauma and it's very real, right? How I've experienced it, what somebody might have done to me, what I allowed people to do to me, that lingered and hurt my spirit, and I had to work through. So I'm not negating it or minimizing at all. So I don't want you to think that. But what I will say is there are some people that just don't know how to exist without it. So there's an addiction to it. Why? Because sometimes if you're, a trauma person and you talk about it, you get people to constantly hold your hand or coddle you or, tell you everything is going to be all right or fight battles for you, or you feel like you have a posse, right? You have backup. But the reality is you might just need to go to therapy, right? You might just need to be talking to God about this and asking him to heal the trauma. And I'm not saying you don't do both, right? You might need to be doing both because maybe it's really, a family trauma and you need to break it. And it's not something that you can do easily. And it's definitely not something that you should even think about doing on your own. It's something that you really need assistance to navigate through. But the thing I want you to kind of take hold is, it doesn't need to be something that you allow. One of the things that for me has been really helpful is noting areas that still cause me trauma, or areas where I feel like I could feel the addiction, the love addiction, the kind of trying to seep back in. I'm like, nope. We have to at some point say to ourselves as grown adults, yes, that hurt me. Yes, I was addicted to that thing. Yes, or I am still addicted to that thing. We need to be honest with ourselves. That's the first thing. Because oftentimes we're like, we try to act like we all have all of our stuff together. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is bothering us. And that's not the case. We are human beings. We're going to have human experiences. And part of that is trying to navigate things that come over us. And addiction is one of those things that come over us. I don't care if it's shopping too much. I don't care if it's eating everything that's in your path. I don't care if it's not eating, because people often talk about, overeating, but undereating is an addictive thing. Why? Because people have body dysmorphic disorder. a whole bunch of different hosts of things that allow for them to look at their body, and we can see somebody who looks really thin or super fit, and they see somebody who is way different than what's in front of them. So now they have an addiction to controlling weight, and every single thing that comes in their mouth, they're looking at, the sodium, they're looking at the carbohydrates. And I'm not saying you can't be healthy, right? Be healthy, but doing things to a point where it's not rational is where addiction seeps in. Doing things to the point where you're hurting yourself, then that's where you're noticing potentially that is an addictive thing. Doing things where you're hurting others around you, that may be something where you're knocking on the door of an addictive behavior. Some people, how many of you have heard of OCD? Right? So OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, is an addictive behavior, right? People have to knock on the door a certain amount of times, or they have to, if you have a rug that has fringe on the edge. I mean, I've watched some of these shows where people have to make sure that the fringe is a specific way. Why are we addicted to, even that, right? Because imagine the control that has over your day. To have to do something, that must be so exhausting, to constantly have to do that and fight that need for things to be perfect or just so. And I'm not saying you can't be neat. Congratulations. I'm a clutter person. God will have to work through that on me. But if you're a neat freak, okay. There's a point where you can be a neat freak, and then there's a point where you're making other people uncomfortable even being in your presence because you're picking at things and commenting on things and pulling things apart. That makes other people uncomfortable because they feel like nothing about being around you makes you feel comfortable that, with them being around you or interacting. But also it makes them feel like they can't be around you because they're never going to be good enough to be in your presence. So you have to be aware of that. Some people have addiction to control. 100%. Jesus and therapy is everything. I love that. I love that. There was for the longest time, in the church, people had such an issue. All you need is Jesus and Jesus alone. I'm like, okay, Jesus is the answer. I 100% believe that. But I also believe that Jesus gave us knowledge to be able to help one another to navigate through this world. So why would he, if he didn't want it, he would not allow for there to be people that could help us to navigate that. Now, there are some things that he allows because he has allowed us to do foolishness, right? But to say, okay, it's okay to go to a nutritionist or a heart doctor because I need somebody to look at my heart, right? I need to go to a cardiologist because they need to take, some looks at my heart. I need to go to a nephrologist because I need them to look at my liver, right? I can do those things. That's okay. But as soon as I need somebody to kind of help me navigate what's going on in my mind, then that's not okay. That God didn't say that. We have to stop doing that. He did not. That is nowhere in any Bible. Knock it off. We have to stop that. But yes, going back to the control thing, addiction to control is a very real thing, and it's often most exhibited because people felt out of control. If people felt like people took control over their life or how they lived or, the things that they wanted to do. I find a lot of times when kids grow up in an environment where the parents are overbearing all of the time, then oftentimes there's that need. I know, for example, people that are addicted to control that grew up in a situation where they just had a lot of kids in the house. And so they never felt like they had control over their own time, over the food that they would eat, over the clothes that they would wear, that type of a thing. Maybe they always had hand-me-downs, or because the family had so many people always there, they always had to eat the same thing. So now they're like, I'm not letting anybody tell me anything. I'm controlling what I eat, when I do this, when I do that. And again, growing into an adult and kind of saying, these are the things that I want for myself, that's not bad. But when it gets to the point where you're controlling every single thing and there's zero ability for you to be flexible, and other people are now having to pay the price for your need to control them or the environment, that's where it can get a little slippery. It's a slippery slope at that point. So that's something that we also have to, bear in mind. One other thing that I want to say is that, and I think Al mentioned it earlier, is, addiction to the church. Now, that's an interesting thing, and most people be like, what? What in the world is he talking about? But we can be addicted to the titles, right? Because it's funny, the church is, was meant to be a place where we could come together and glorify God's name together, coming together in unity. However, for some people, it became social, right? It became, and there's not necessarily a bad thing with it being social. If those are the people you choose to hang out with, and, you're hoping that they all are aligned and are, working towards the same goal of, spreading the gospel. That's not within itself a bad thing. That being said, there are people addicted to the titles that they might get. And they need to have people address them as such. You will call me this. And look, when I get to heaven, if he just calls me Stacey, I'm good. Like, I don't need to be called a title. But there are people that are addicted to that. But there are also people addicted to doing work in the church. And they're doing that not necessarily just because they love the church, but they're doing it because they want people to say, oh, look what this one has done, or look what, this one has accomplished, or maybe they're trying to avoid what's happening at home. We assume we see people working hard, but there are people that are workaholics are oftentimes trying to avoid, maybe they were poor and they're avoiding that, right? They just don't want to go back into poverty. So like that nature, that addiction to work might be for that. But it also could be to avoid, being at home and alone if they're single. It could also be to avoid their family. I know people that work, they're like, have a gazillion jobs because, their family drives them crazy. And so they would rather be at work than to be at home. There are some people that just don't know how to sit down. They have zero ability to just chill out, right? Because again, it might have been something that as a kid, they were told that that's how you do things. And for a lot of people, I mean, I grew up in a Bayesian household, so there was definitely that thought process. You're going to work, right? That's what you're going to do. Everybody in this place works. We all going to work. We have chores. Get up early on a Saturday, get the work done. And I was like, good Lord, like, why are you up at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock on a Saturday? And sometimes it was earlier than that. And it was like, are you going to sleep the whole day away? And I was like, good Lord, I just want, why are you mowing the lawn, sir? It is 7 a.m. Isn't that against the noise ordinance? Stop it. But that mentality, and for me, who is not like, I don't know why I have no problem working hard. Anybody who's met me, I'll stay up till all hours of the night. I'll not sleep a whole day if I have to get something, a project or something done. But I have always felt the need to also stop, right? And so for me, I always felt badly, like I wasn't, I didn't fall into the groove of the family if I wanted to stop. So that's one of those things. In my family, they all work. That's just how they are. So true. And it becomes a DV situation. Oh, the control. Yeah. Look, control can get really, really dangerous, especially when you have one person who has an addiction to control and you have another person that has an addiction to love, right? So there's one person on this side is like, yep, I want to just be loved. I want to be loved. I want to love on this person and I'm going to figure it out. I know that, this person, male or female, has gone through some things, because people always say DV and they always think it's the dude. Sometimes it's the females, right? So, it could be, this person over here wants love, and this person over here has always felt out of control. So everything that they're going to do, all the decisions that they make are going to focus on control. So they're addicted to that, right? Because they felt out of control. And this person's addicted to love because maybe they never felt it. So now you have these two people coming together, and that could get ugly real quick, right? So it's important for us to look at our addictions. And again, I didn't say this to, tell people that you can't go shopping. If you like to go shopping, that's your business. You won't see me there. But again, don't do it to the point where it hurts other parts of your life. If you're shopping and there's no room for you to put stuff, if you're shopping and you don't need anything new, so you're just shopping just because it's something for you to do and fill your time, right? Read a book, people. Like, read a book, write a book. If you're shopping just because, it's something that you used to do in the past, or if you're, eating because you're bored, if you're eating because you were hurt, this is what I'm asking for us. And I'm saying us, right? Because it's something that I also consistently have to manage. When we're thinking about these things, we have to look at the why we're doing them, and not just do them out of habit, or not just do them because one, it can get expensive, but two, it can get really dangerous, right? If we're just, eating because, somebody hurt us. If I ate every time somebody hurt me, I would literally be eating French fries as we speak, right? So the reality is, you can't just consistently do things because. And the child Stacey that might have done that is almost 50 years old and can't be doing that, right? So there has to be some measure of looking at ourselves. There has to be some measure of dissecting our why, and then saying, okay, I don't have the ability to walk away from this. I know it. I can identify what my addiction is. And maybe I can't unpack my why. Maybe I know a little bit of why I do what I do, but maybe I really need somebody to walk me through this. Find someone that you can talk to. And I'm not just talking about somebody who wants to hear your business, because there's lots of those people. Those people are everywhere, everywhere you go, right? But I'm talking about somebody who is wise, potentially somebody who has the skill to be doing it. And that might mean making an appointment. There are websites online, betterhelp.com. I've heard lots of people have had success finding someone that they can navigate their, addictive behaviors with, their whys, work on some of their past stuff so that they can be free. Because, man, look, we're not getting any younger, and quite frankly, we have one life to live. Why are we living it kind of bogged down by foolishness? And so for me, as I was thinking about this, and this topic was actually given to me by my mom, so I was really happy about, having her say this to me, and then it prompting me to really think about, those things, and, areas where I might need to, think about. Because I oftentimes, we really concentrate on what we do well, or where we get pats on the back, and, or what other people have done to us. But when are we looking at ourselves? Because right now I'm talking to you and I'm looking at me, right? My face is on this phone screen, as I talk to you. And that means I need to be looking at Stacey, and what can Stacey do better? And where are the areas where, Stacey falls short? Like, where are those areas? So look at that for yourself, because you owe it to yourself to be in a position where you not just live life and get up every day and go about the business of just being alive, but you deserve to live life in a way that is, one, happy, and two, pleasing to God. Because I'm always going to add that in. Y'all, if you didn't know, you haven't been paying attention to my episodes. I'm always going to squeeze God in there as much as possible. It can be toxic. Those situations can be toxic, Al. You're absolutely right. So I just want to thank you guys again, for being with me, and hopefully this episode prompts you to think about your own addictive behaviors and what you can do to fix those. Don't look at other people's, because we can identify other people's addictive behaviors real quick. That person is addicted to trauma. That person's addicted to men. That one's addicted to shopping. That one's addicted, whatever their addiction is. Let's look at ourselves, because the one person we're going to always be with is ourselves, right? And the one person that you can control, and I don't mean control in that way, right? But the one person you can control is yourself. So that's what I really hope that you look for. Now, episode 10 has taken place, and I have a challenge for you all. For the first person that gets me 10 more followers, I will have a lovely prize for you. I'm not going to tell you what the prize is, but I do have a lovely prize for you. Okay, so the first person, so make sure that they tell me that you sent me, or you can give me their name as they sign up. But the first person that gets me 10 additional followers, so it can't be somebody who's already on here. So Tiffany, don't say Cheryl, come out and then re-add yourself. So none of that. But yes, of course, I'm wearing blue for Autism Awareness Month. So yes. But yes, so for those of you, the first 10, whoever does that, you're going to get a lovely prize. Okay. Thank you so much for being with me. As I say at the end of all of my episodes, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and extend to yourself and please to me a measure of grace. Happy Easter weekend. He has risen. We're going to be celebrating tomorrow. And I hope to see you next Saturday where we talk about autism awareness with our expert Tiffany and her daughter. I'm sure we'll be hearing her in the background. And other than that, have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye, everyone.